My name's Janet Smith and I'm the Artistic Director of Scottish Dance Theatre, and I'm joined today by two guests who are working with the company at the moment.
I don't think I'm a guest anymore.
No, but you are today.
I'm Caroline Bowditch and I'm Scottish Dance Theatre's dance agent for Change.
And otherwise I'm part of the woodwork, obviously.
And I'm Marc Brew. I've been working with the company as Associate Director for there.
And one thing that's interesting to me is that these guys are both Australians. And why I point that out is because when we decided that we wanted to go on a journey with integrating or including with disability, we couldn't find any Scottish artists that were disabled that came forward. And so I think that's kind of telling, and it's something that we've been trying to remedy, and that might be a long journey. So we're going to talk about this evening's performance, but first of all, just to give you a context. Actually, how many people have not seen the company before? Can you stick your hand up? Not seen it? Okay, that's good. Well, then I'm going to just give you a little introduction. So Scottish Dance Theatre is part of Dundee Rep Theatre, and we're based in Dundee, up on the East Coast, and it was born out of the theatre's need to reach into parts of the community where people really did not come into the theatre. And what they decided they would do was get a couple of drummers and a couple of dancers and go into some of the housing schemes and the small community centres and just do some classes. And from that was born a community dance company and a youth dance company. And from the community dance company, which was directed by an amazing man called Royston Muldoon, Scottish Dance Theatre was born. It's had two other artistic directors since then, and I'm the third. I've been with the company for 13 years, and I'm very, very old. What I decided to do was to continue with both the idea of trying to keep the work connected to people, connected to communities, accessible, and to have a strong education thrust through the work. So a strong look to community, so that all of our dancers are also teachers, and they love it. They don't do it like a pain. Sometimes it's challenging, but they do it to learn more about themselves as artists, and they share it because it's a little bit like missionary work. If you're involved in contemporary dance, you believe in something that's great and you want to convert everybody. And also, I decided to keep it for now as a repertory company, which means that in tonight's programme you'll see two different pieces of work. So I think of choreographers as having different choreographic voices, different life, different world views, and different stories they might want to tell us, or different ideas they might want to make us think about, and they might do this in different movement languages. So the first piece you're going to see tonight is called The Life and Times of Girl A, which is choreographed by Ben Duke, a choreographer who actually has a very deep crossovers between dance and theatre, and I'll talk a little bit more about him later. The second piece of work explores a strand of the work that we've been developing with Scottish Dance Theatre, and I don't know where it's going. It's just something that we felt the need to address, which is about integrated work where we're wanting to challenge the idea of who can dance and what is a dancer. We're wanting to imagine that in the 21st century, maybe what people might want to see on stage is more like everybody's stories and more like all of us, a more sense of inclusion than that idea of something that's amazing but I could never do. So we're kind of exploring that thread within our work. And that piece of work is called NQR, which we'll talk about in a minute, and it was co-choreographed, which is also not quite right, by three choreographers, who are the three of us sitting in front of you. Maybe we'll talk about that second piece of work first of all, so I don't just sit here talking too much. Now, Caroline, you came up with the title, didn't you? You want to tell us?
Yeah. NQR is an acronym or an abbreviation for Not Quite Right, and it was used in people's medical records up until 1988, and it was used to describe some sort of difference that couldn't actually be diagnosed, but they would just the medical staff would just kind of feel that this person was a little bit different. There was something not quite right about them, so they would just write NQR in their files, potentially for further investigation or just so that it was recorded. And it sparked off lots of things in my head about this idea that we're all kind of striving for perfection. We're all striving to be right, to be normal, to fit in, all those sorts of things. And what happens if we don't? Does that mean that we have a lesser quality of life? Does that mean we're less valid in the world? All those sorts of things. But I also got interested in the idea about the way that we put each other into boxes, the ways that we kind of measure each other. So often when we meet each other for the first time, we'll want to know, so where are you from? Or what's your job? Are you married? So we want to know where to put people. We want to know how to measure them up and which box or pigeonhole we can put them in, because that gives us more information about where they might be in a hierarchy or how we can relate to them, what we share with them. So they were just some of the things that kind of floating in my head when we were making this piece.
And for Marc, I was really interested in what you wanted to bring to the piece. And so can you talk just a bit about that around your aesthetic and the challenge that you offer the dancers in movement?
I suppose as a choreographer, I was sort of looking at my own practice and how I could bring that practice to this collaboration. And in the past, I've used a lot of tasks and giving the dance a lot of tasks to generate movement, and then sort of going in there and directing it. And I've sort of gone on a full circle from originally starting to use my own material and then not using my own material, to then giving tasks, to then actually thinking, oh, maybe I can use my material, and maybe that's interesting.
I just ask you what you mean by a task.
Yeah, so what I mean by task is I may say to dancers, oh, I want you to, I may give them a length of time of music, say 2 lots of 8, and I want you to find 6 movements that represent past memories that changed your life. So then they'll go about thinking about it. They may even write those down, what those memories may be, and generate some movement that represents that idea.
And by material, what do you mean?
By material, I mean physical material. So they would put into physical movement.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but these are layman, so it's good for layman's terms for us to just understand.
So then I sort of went back to my own movement vocabulary, and I'm paralysed from the chest down. I have a physical disability, and I set some floor material based around my own physicality with the dancers and had them learn it. And that was sort of my starting point. And then what I then looked at was layering that and how we could develop that. So we had like a set phrase, which was the phrase that I taught them originally. And then the next thing I asked them to do was look at how they could escape from that or find explosive movements from the movement I gave them. The movement was set on the floor, so it was very much restricted to the low level, and I wanted to look at how they could explode out of that restriction and defy that restriction. So they went away and created some really interesting and powerful movement, and then we sort of put it together, sort of working very much collaboratively and structured it into a sequence that opens up, showing and fun.
And also, that movement is completely based on your physicality and the movement generated from you. So it was really about the dancers completely copying Marc's movement and trying to get it as accurate as they possibly could. Which was a major challenge to kind of say, no, actually, think about the fact that you can't move from here down. So although they've got all this ability through their legs, they weren't able to use it.
And I was just trying to pick up on that quality that brings. I mean, it wasn't necessarily saying, oh, you're trying to pretend that you're disabled, but it's about bringing that quality, that texture of that movement that was interesting for the eye to see a different way of moving.
So when we're putting together the work, there are other kind of elements that come into choreography. The first one will be music, and in the case of NQR, we were working alongside a composer and musician who is part of the piece. And we have this wonderful guy, Robin, who you see in the work, who actually ended up both choreographing, both composing and being a performer within the work. And so what you hear is often him playing in relation to music that he's also put on tape, so you get this interesting mixture of live and recorded sound. And there's some other music by a different composer called DPJ, who also started work on the project with us. There's a kind of mixture of working there. In the end, he was a little afraid of this creative process and of the time that it took to do this work, and the time he left himself to do it. But Robin was very, very brave and very, very curious and kind of loving the opportunity of doing more. So we gradually flipped over during the process. And often in creative process, there's something very raw and unknown. You're working together towards something, you don't know what the outcome is going to be, and you're all taking risks along the way. And it is a lot of kind of trust and negotiation, isn't it, around the relationship. And the other element in this work is the design. Well, actually, there's design and there's lighting design. And our designer came up with this wonderful idea of perspex boxes, which was partly influenced by something we'd invented for Caroline to train with the dancers, because she does. And that to get out of this chair and to have more freedom, as a mover, we decided that she needed not to have the encumberment of these arms, but to be able to put her feet on the floor, stabilise, and to feel that connection, like dancers really need to root into the ground, as well as rooting through the hips, and also to have space around. So we'd invented a box, and when our designer came up, we were kind of playing around with the box, and we had some materials, some movement material to show her, and she went, okay, I really like these boxes. And so they became something that could be either used as a little plinth, you know, something you might put a specimen on to examine, something that this idea that Caroline had about boxing things in, about how we categorise ourselves, we pigeonhole ourselves in boxes, and also the idea of, with this perspex thing that you could light through, also the idea of X-ray and examination, and this kind of, I suppose, a kind of medical reference. So all those things are going on in the design. And in the costume, very simple idea of being not quite right. I always remembered, and I'm sure you might have had these dreams, or your parents might. When I first went to the States to study dance, my mother used to dream that she was running around New York looking for me, but she was in her 90s. And there's something, this thing about being not dressed right or being semi-naked. Is one of our dream themes when things aren't right. And I know dancers have this dream that you've got to go on stage, but either you don't have the shoes if you wear ballet shoes, or you don't have your knickers, or you don't have your... And it's one of our insecurity dreams, but that idea that you're halfway between being dressed and not dressed. So it's an element you'll notice. You know, there's one sock on and one sock off. There's a man in a jacket, but just with boxer shorts, that kind of mixture of costumes. And so it just gives a sense of the ideas that... Can you hear over there? Are you okay? Yeah, tell her that you can't. Do feel free to move further over as well. Okay. So is there anything else we want to say more about NQR?